Go purple. Hey, welcome to episode 120, This Life in Tech. I'm Jason.
Back from Ann Arbor, Dan.
And our very special guest.
And I'm
Grandpa
TK. What's that, Dan?
Grandpa TK.
There we go. Yeah, I had to get up early this morning.
Oh, good to have you on.
That's good to be here.
Yeah, I was just going to say, man, welcome back. I think this is the second time you've done the show.
It is.
The first one was quite some time ago.
You were still in single-digit episodes back then.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, it was under 10. I know that.
Yeah. And we took a break for a bit, but we've been cranking them out pretty consistently now.
Yeah, no, it's awesome.
Yeah, well, we always have fun. That's the whole thing. As with everything, we don't do it for everyone else. We do it for ourselves. At least we have a dedicated time that we have a conversation for 30 to 45 minutes on stuff that we think is interesting.
Yeah, I always look at it as, if nothing else, I know at least once, if not twice a week, I get to talk to some good friends about some cool shit that I'm interested in. Yeah,
no doubt. That's awesome.
Yeah, kind of evaporates some of the drudgery of a typical week for any human being,
So the question I've got, TK, is how long did it take you to get all of those African caterpillars to be trained for your beer? Jason had the Russell 1.
21 days. 21 days and 23 nights.
I don't know. I've had my beard for so long now. It started when we were all at Sound Circle. It was one of those no shave Novembers, I think in 15.
Yeah.
And I've never gotten rid of
it. I just don't have the patience for it. I get tired of it after about, I don't know,
Shocker.
A week. My patience is very, very low on very many things.
See, for me, it's always just been after a certain number of weeks or months or a whim, I just get tired of looking the same in the mirror. That's it. So I'll change my facial hair, which is easy to do. I'll change my hair, which is easy to do. But I don't know, man. I got to my 40s. What's that?
Get a new tattoo.
Yeah, that too. But I got to my early 40s now, and things are starting to stabilize. So I don't know if that's a sign that I've actually grown up and matured, or if now I'm just extremely lazy. I don't know which one it is.
Making better use of your time.
That could be, man. That could be.
When people ask me, like, "Oh, you shave," because all the time it's just back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. I just said, no, I tend to only shave maybe 2 times a week, and it just depends on which 2 times it's going to be. It's random. It could be 2 days in a row. I don't know.
I'll tell you though, man, with this haircut and now the mustache especially, we've talked about shaving a lot on the podcast for some reason. I don't know. Maybe because nobody ever talked to me about it when I was young. Man, every time I shave now, I hear that old school Indiana Jones music in the background. You know what I mean? When I got the little badger brush, I'm lathering up. So it's a nice little ritual.
And I think now there's, there's enough of these boutique little stores and online presences where you can get all that old school, the brush and the shaver, you can hang all that stuff up, and they've made it more of an experience. Just about the time I decide never to shave again, it becomes a thing you can go wildly spend money on and talk about it,
Yeah, exactly. I'll tell you what though, man. Odin bless Amazon, because I just ordered my shit off Amazon. I just got another set of 200 Japanese stainless steel blades. Dude, that'll last me probably a year and a half. And it's 10 cents a week.
For your old school barber one?
Yeah. For my safety razor. Double-sided blades.
Because I use the Chevette, which is like the straight razor, except it's replaceable blades.
Mm-hmm.
Working up to that point to have the straight razor.
I thought you were talking about a crappy Chevy from the 70s.
Oh.
When we were in high school, I had a buddy of mine that had a 79 Chevette, and girls would ask him what kind of car he's got. He goes, "Oh, I got a Vet." Yeah. Way to go. Way to advertise yourself.
Sure.
So, and now he's in marketing for a product security company, right?
Probably, yeah, exactly.
Oh God, man.
Oh, that's what it is. I love it. All the marketing stuff for any company. It's all right, which part of this is true? It's 10%.
But that's, you know, and both you guys know me well enough that, and have been throughout other companies, that like the marketing thing always drives me up a wall, because you want to be technically correct, but you want to sell the product, and you're usually fighting marketing people for how far you can expand, you know, bump up against the truth fence.
Right.
Right. As opposed to, you know, hey, we got 4.2 million users. No, we actually have 9,000.
Yeah.
Right. We haven't had 4.2 million views on our Twitter account, let alone people actually pay for our stuff. Right. And having a positive affirmative message that gets people to want to at least look at your stuff and then keep it in the middle of the road is hard. And that's why I think all three of us said over time, we'll never hire a marketing person who has a marketing degree.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I think, I don't know if it's necessarily tech in general, but I think it's a good generalization, but it's certainly cyber products. The marketing strategy seems to consistently be, we're going to spend a ton of money to convince people that they need this. Whereas if you look at other really successful marketing campaigns for other products, I mean, look at cheeseburgers, look at Hardee's Carl's Jr. And I have firsthand experience with it because I worked there for 6 years for the parent company. They figured out how to use marketing to find what people want, and then they create that.
Right.
Which is like the opposite direction. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that seems to be way more successful for my perception of a dollar spent.
That's what Steve Jobs did.
Yeah, I think in general, tech products, and I'll give you an example. One of the products that we're working on now kind of takes, you know, under the heading of, if you have a hammer, every problem looks like a nail.
Sure.
Well, we have some unbelievably talented offensive security minds. And because of that, how do we take that offensive mindset and turn it into a defensive tool? Right. And typically now we build walls when we want to protect networks, and then we sit on the inside of the wall and wait for people to poke holes into them, and then we patch them. And then we try to get log events to see, hey, where did that start? And then we try to be more obfuscating in how we do that, so they don't poke that same hole twice. Right. Well, what if we took that completely outside of the network, and in the front end of that got people trapped in honeypots, a way misunderstood or misused term, but trap them in a virtual network that appeared to be like the real network. If you have the real credentials and stuff, you, with, you know, limited controls, you go right through. But take that offensive mindset. One of the things we run into is that we've never done it that way before. So when you start, if you're going to build something, and I think secure voice and messaging that we all three of us were in for a while is another thing. Like, people need it. People need it, but they're limited by you've got the two types of technology, right? I either have disruptive or I have displacing. I'd rather build a product today that's displacing, because I know you're already spending money on it. I just have to convince you that my box is better than your box. Whereas with disruptive technology, Dan, how much free float do you have in your budget every year for IT?
Not much.
5%, maybe.
Maybe.
If that.
Most companies should have, they should have anywhere between 8 and 11%, but that's typically not the case.
Well, but some of that 8 to 11% is, hey, if I've got a breach, how many extra things do I have to do this? And so you've got some strategic / prudent reserve to deal with stuff blowing up in the middle of the night. But that the fact that people need it, right? Or in the case of the Fed space, if we don't write a policy saying you need it, what we do is we do a CYA for every GS 14 and 15 to say, in the absence of the policy, in the absence of being required to do anything, you're allowing me to do nothing. And so that's when you start saying, from a marketing perspective, how do I convince people to do it? That's when things get a little fuzzy around the edges, I think.
Yeah, well, and I like that disambiguation between disruption and displacement. And I totally agree with your idea.
Well, it's even though I absolutely hate Tesla.
The man or the product.
Yeah, it's all of the above. The funny part for me, the mere fact that he named his company after a thief is great.
Oh wow!
And we're off to the races.
But the way in which he did things, most companies will be like Netflix. They will attack from below, be niche, and and basically land and expand their products met. Where Tesla attacked from above, and then they did one thing extremely well, which is the battery and how they're going to cool the battery. And everyone else, Toyota's catching up with theirs, but everyone else is behind. But the way he did that by attacking from above is very rare in that regard in terms of displacing. They're now for the first time outselling the C-Class of Mercedes and the BMW 3 Series. So that displacement is quite interesting. Is whether or not they'll keep pace, who knows? But for the first time, they are.
Well, Netflix, I think, is a great example, man. Take Disney, because Disney just announced at least partial, what's going to be on their new streaming service, and they announced the price. Yeah. This is after they decided to not go with Netflix for a partnership, essentially hijack some of the tech, had people build it under those premises, and then did it themselves, which, of course, Disney can. They're a huge empire. And knowing Disney, having spent an enormous amount of my adult life there, they're really good at marketing.
Pretty Mickey Mouse bullshit, isn't it?
Well, look, man, there's something about that experience, though, man, and you all the way from.
It's kind of goofy that you went and spent your adult life there.
Stop.
Well, hey, man, you get a little daughter and you live down the street from Disneyland. What the fuck are you gonna do? You play ball is what you do if you want peace.
I can't think of anything else to say now, but with about Disney, I can't come up with another pun for the moment.
Oh, I got some princess ones for you. Well, I got some princess ones about you.
Oh boy.
But anyway, man, because I'm not a big Disney person, what I've fallen in love with is the experience they've engineered, all the way from the hardware to the software to the crowd to the cast, so forth and so on. I can bet you they knew exactly how much people were willing to spend on their streaming service, knowing that they were still going to have Netflix, because everybody else competes with Netflix. Everybody.
And if you even go back further to Netflix, Netflix as its current incarnation is a reinvention of itself that a good portion of the leadership of that company did not want to do at the time they did it, because they thought it wouldn't, this internet thing wouldn't catch on. And when they did that, it was a big, bold move. And you look now, there's one Blockbuster left in America. It's in Bend, Oregon. Yeah. They still use floppy disks, and it's a niche play, and people just go in there for the experience. I mean, I don't even have any way to play any hard media anymore.
No.
The thing that doesn't surprise me about Disney, and it's been from the entire inception of the theme parks. Everything that Walt did was basically on his belly, looking at everything from the point of view of a child. So the only way to do that is he got into the mindset, or in this case, the physical set of the child, and would film and look at everything from 3 feet. And
yeah,
where most companies, again, do everything from they'll talk about, well, let's take this up to the 10,000 foot view. He did the exact opposite. Everything was done from a 3 foot view. And that's why I believe that they probably have the right price to be able to, they're not going to take any money away from Netflix per se, but they've just added all of their own.
Yeah. Well, and I don't think they're looking to put it in the vernacular we're using. They're not looking to disrupt online streaming of video. They're looking to displace a very narrow segment of it so that they can capture that and they'll expand it. I mean, they just got Fox, right? I mean, now they own the entirety of the Marvel catalog.
What it really is doing is it's starting to displace the cable service companies. The cable companies are going to be nothing but an internet service provider. That's why Comcast got into the cellular business. They haven't done very well with it yet, but they know we better do something because everyone else is streaming. The decentralization of the for content is going to make it to where Comcast, Time Warner, all of them, they're nothing but an internet service provider.
That's all Verizon is for me now. I have a gigabit pipe coming into the house, and we do what we want to do. And I mean, a lot of it too is the demographics. I have a 14-year-old and a 20-year-old, and neither one of them watch television.
Yeah.
Right? They want what they want now, and I've actually adopted that premise myself. I mean, you get the thing, you've got work, you've got everything else, and I want to watch a show. I'll go. Oh, I want to watch this. I'll go find it and I'll go watch it. I don't want to wait till Wednesday night and do appointment viewing like when we were kids.
Right. Yeah. Think how dramatically that business model has changed simply because of that premise. I'll watch what I want when I want for as long as I want. And if you can't give that to me, I'm not paying you.
Yeah. The binge watching has become more of the norm, and they'll do that on a weekend. Or it's raining, they can't do whatever outside. Well, I'm going to binge watch whatever, and done.
I mean, that's the House of Cards model, right? A House of Cards was really the first show to do that. And I'm going to just watch one episode, and 12 hours later, you're like, where did my life go? I'm dehydrated and everything else. But I watch Billions, and this year they've semi-released it, right? They'll release one a few days later, and so they're still building that comeback excitement that you want, right? But I mean, like, you go back to Disney, like when Disney entered the cruise ship market, immediately they figured out not just how to cater to kids, because that's the easy part. Like you said, that's the 3-foot view that they've, been almost 100 years in the making. They figured out how to cater to adults, right? And they put a low jack on your kid, and they remand them to a whole group of very happy young folks that really are going to want to give them that great experience. And then there's bars all around the ship, and the parents just go get loaded, and then they go back and pick up their kids later in the day and go to sleep and start over again the next day.
Yeah.
Plus the experience. Like, you can go, there's 7-day packages now where you can do 4 days at the park, 3 days at the cruise, or vice versa. But the beauty part about it is when you get off the airplane in Orlando, your luggage is picked up, and then wherever you're at, your luggage is there, and you never have to bring it anywhere for the whole time you're there. So the supply chain piece, everybody likes to see princesses and Marvel characters, but the supply chain piece is really where they've excelled.
Well, and I think it was a necessary pressure for them, and I'm glad they figured it out. And I've done those packages, and man, they are seamless experiences.
Yeah.
Seamless. And so traveling is already stressful, especially with kids, right? And when you don't have to worry about that supply chain logistical nightmare for yourself, and it's taken care of, dude, I'll pay for that. I'll pay a premium for it.
I mean, I have a friend of mine I went to high school with. It's he's a general manager of a television station in Maine, and he has been fascinated with Disney ever since we were kids. And he has a business now, and where he plans everything for somebody. So they just go up, they end up getting their wristbands in the mail, and then whatever they've asked for, they get. He makes all their dinner reservations for them, tells them where they have to go, when they have to be where. And he loves it because now he gets preferential. He gets treated like a king, literally, when he goes down to Disney.
Yeah, yeah. And I'll say this, especially for tech work, because there's a phenomenal amount of tech in the parks and in these experiences.
Oh yeah, no doubt.
Man, I think Walt Disney's a much better case study in design and engineering than Steve Jobs, personally.
I think all the modern theme parks are. Right, because here we have Busch Gardens, and how they get you from one place to the other. Because I'll even go back, like when my son Jared was 12, 13 years old, and Jorah was 5 or 6. There was 2 different experiences at the park for them. Right, my wife would take the little one, and they would go on little kid rides, and all my son wanted to do was do the 12 roller coasters. And so we would literally go from roller coaster to roller coaster, meet for lunch after he did 12, and then we'd go back and do them again. And then we'd leave the park, because they had it structured that it was easy to march from one to the other, because they understood their demographic. And they also understood the adult piece. When you go into the food land, there was the German place where there was beer.
Yeah, right.
And so, it's like, it's how do we do that? But, the leader in the, kind of the market center has always been Disney.
Yeah. I don't know if the right, case study is Walt Disney, or if it's Steve Jobs, mainly because Walt didn't come up with a lot of these things. It was after he was gone. But he set the foundation. I look at it from like a succession planning. How did he pick the people that were going to take over? And did that become the culture? Someone to build upon the last, which is what you would want. I don't know. Steve Jobs did not do that. I don't think at all.
No, and I would increasingly I would argue that the power of the vision of Walt Disney is so vast that the vision itself doesn't actually need a successor. His vision is continued to grow and expand and dominate our society culturally, right? Compared to look at Apple stalling right now. I don't know, man. I think it's a really interesting analysis.
Well, and look at it. Bill Gates didn't have a good successor either. You know, and companies, one of the things they spend a lot of time on is their succession planning.
Mm-hmm.
And look at who, in essence, Bill Gates and Steve Jobs had as their successor. I don't think Tim Cook is doing a great job. I think I've maintained the pace, but they haven't come up with anything earth-shattering. Ballmer didn't either. Now, Satya, I think, is taking Microsoft to the next level.
I agree. That's the renaissance maker of Microsoft right there, is his vision and the people that he's brought in around it to say, we're going to focus on what our core good has always been. And you look at, what they've done with their cloud experience with Azure, right? I mean, I was talking to Walmart when I was at CoolSpan, and he asked where we were at. And I go, well, what do you mean, where are we at? And he goes, where's everything stored? And I said, in AWS. He's like, we will not do business with you unless you put it in Azure. For obvious reasons, because Amazon's killing their business, And so he's like, yeah, we don't do anything unless it's thing. And if we look back to when we were all at Silent Circle together, Stoney, kind of sitting in the office by himself, was that visionary, because at the time when we talked about hybrid networks, it was always terrestrial and cloud. Now it's, hey, it can be, I got some of my stuff in Azure, I got some of it here, I got some of it in Oracle and AWS. And the companies have realized that in order to do that, you have to have those interconnects, and that has to be seamless for the user.
Yeah.
And think about Microsoft at this point. I mean, can you imagine under Bill Gates or Ballmer that they would drop their browser and pick up a competitor's base, Chromium, and make that their browser? Which is what Microsoft's announced. Their for Edge is going to be based on Chromium. I mean,
I don't think it would ever happen, but I think it's a good direction.
I think so too. It's your development team just got, for the most part, cut in half. Now, if they were smart, and I believe that they are, those developers are going to go do something else. They're not getting rid of them. They're going to go, hopefully, make Azure better, or other products of theirs better, so they can compete. But I don't think that they for the first time are going to back what is our core competency and defending the hill on that. Everything else, essentially outsource.
Well, when you look real quick, this is my perspective on that. I think it's a good idea. When you look at where Microsoft is headed in their software platforms, like take Office, which is probably their flagship, right? They're clearly, this is like the culmination of the 90s vision of what they called Hailstorm at the time, which was this online app that we know now as a web app, right? Or software as a service. And they finally got to it. And so what's more important, for you to have your own browser that's your brand on your operating system, or for all of your users, which is probably more clearly than the browser itself in terms of user count, has a good seamless experience because the engine, Chromium, is consistent across pretty much all the other major browsers. I think it's a hard decision that they made, but I think it's the good decision for their software platforms.
I agree. I like it. I think it's a smart move.
Well, they've also opened up their store and gone, back in the 90s, everything you purchased was an add-on, a nickel here, a nickel there, a nickel there, right? They're like, hey, we've got you on our subscription. I think it does a lot of things. One, it facilitates better security, right? Because you're not trusting the lowest common denominator in your IT department to make sure that you've done the upgrades and patches and all that stuff. And now you're saying, hey, we realize that there's a base platform of software that is valuable, and then everything else people can pick and choose to a certain extent, a freemium piece that leads them to a paywall if they really need all that feature set. But how many products do you buy where you really need to exploit the fullness of the feature set? Oh man, I don't.
No.
And I think the biggest thing that they did was say, hey, why do we have a mobile OS? We don't really need to do that. There's two establishments. Let's just make kick-ass apps that appear on that. And I think Outlook, and then buying up all the other little satellite former, we work with Outlook apps. on iOS and Android, and then morphing that into Outlook. And now I think it's the best that app's ever been.
I would agree for sure.
It makes life easier. They're going back to what's their core competencies. Not, I mean, a browser is a commodity. I don't want anyone else entering the office space. Like, I don't want another Google Apps popping up or another word processor. I'm defending what is. I'm the king of the hill, and I'm making sure no one else even enters the ring.
Well, right. and you can take an analogy from video game development. Nobody talks about the engines, except you can't have a game without an engine, right? And so there's dedicated companies that build engines, right? Like CryEngine, for instance, or Unreal Engine. And every other major AAA publisher uses that technology. And it's just a matter of which one do you standardize on, because it gives you a specific user experience when you develop the game and all of its assets and its art and all that jazz, right? So who the fuck is going to spend the development time and money, because you're talking about years of lead time, to build your own engine? Hardly anybody does it. Hardly anybody.
But that, when you start talking in general terms about software, you know, if you look at most like VCs and PE firms, when they go look at companies, and a lot of times, I had a buddy of mine recently who had his first VC experience. He goes, it's all BS, because if you have a great presentation, you're basically selling that presentation in the hopes that somebody will give you a bucket of money, you know, if we do this. But if you show up with a company where you're saying, hey, we've already got the core technology down, it works, you got to go to the command line and look at it. But what we're paying is, in that, you know, the automobile model, we got to put really cool tires on it, paint the car, and get a kick-ass stereo in there so that everybody wants to buy it, to create the great enterprise user experience, right? Your cost of capital to acquire from these firms is demonstrably less, because they've already said, okay, we're not, you know, if there's 100 steps, you're in step 60 or 70, and we can get behind that because we can see the thing working.
Right. Well, and the probability of failure is
negligible.
Right. Because you're already that far along, and you have some established foundation, right?
Yeah. No, and it's, you know, I'll take a company that's poorly run and that has good technology and say, okay, here's the conditions on the money. It won't cost that much, but you're going to have to get rid of this guy, that guy, and this guy, and bring in somebody else, or whatever that may be, because you can see that the technology is there because they've built it and you can get your hands on it.
Right.
I mean, it's almost always a mismanagement problem. And the first thing they do with anything that winds up occurring is, let's reorganize.
Yeah.
Everything is
deck chairs on the Titanic are out of place. Let's not worry about the big white thing ahead. Let's just fix that, right?
We're going to have a reorganization. But every single one of them does that. So it's always funny when all of a sudden someone says, "Yeah, we're having some problems, so we're going to, you know, have a reorganization." I mean, in some cases it's true. But what was the analysis to go down that path? Not just we're going to reorganize for reorganization's sake.
Yeah.
Well, that, you know, it's funny because I've gone in and talked to folks and consulted with C-level teams, and when you walk in the front door and they think you're there from the PE firm or the VC firm, you're there to get rid of people. I'm like, I'm not here to get rid of anybody. What I'm here to do is give you an outlook and a methodology that makes this objective, not subjective. And I can always tell which VP is going to be the one to be walked out. Because when we start looking at these things, I go, I got 3 people I can get rid of. And he's like, well, if you have 3 people you can get rid of today, why didn't you get rid of them yesterday? And it's, you know, you work down that path. Whereas I'll go in and get homework. I'll assign homework. I want you to write down in everything that you have in your purview. I want you to write down every job skill you need. All right? Just in a big long list, and come back to me tomorrow. And then the next day, here's all the people that work in your department. I want you to assign a person to each one of those job skills. If somebody fits multiple skills, put their name there multiple times. And what you then find out is there's always a pool of people that are the C- students that when you say, hey, we've got to do something about, you know, the manpower, because that's your biggest expense, right? And if you're not selling products, if your revenue's not there, if you know, and I hate this saying, but I'm going to say it anyway. If you can't fix the top line by having more revenue, you got to fix the bottom line by crunching stuff in the middle. That the way to do it objectively is to say who is performing at a level. Now in sales, that's really easy. right? Because here's your number. You didn't make your number, go home. Assuming the company's up and running and they're selling stuff, right? How do you do that in development, right? Which developer's better than this one? And that's where being disciplined and having a get tree, having some code repository, not allowing your people to curate local code on machines. So you see 1 line of code, 5 lines of code, 70,000 lines of code, and you're like, where's that come from? What's he been doing? Did he crank it up on Red Bull and Monster for 3 days, or has he just been hoarding stuff on his own machine, right? And that's where, like, when you look at, I think we've talked about, Dan and I've talked about this example, is the post office is in the process of spending some obscene amount of money to move everything to the cloud, and we're talking hundreds of millions of dollars. And 5 of the big boys in the Beltway all bid on the job, and they were all within $100,000 of each other. And I've asked people, I go, how's that possible? And they're like, well, they're all in collusion together because everybody wants to go right to the worst pieces of humanity, right? Like, what's the most debased piece of humanity? And the answer is they could all quantify 1 hour of development, right? And then when you have to go and say, hey, I want to promote this guy, I want this guy to get more money, or this person needs to go, I'm doing it based on a historical retrospective of what they've done. And I think that's in anything. How do I get to objectivity? And that goes back to what we were talking about right before we went on there with with PMPs and everything like that. They're trying to find some objective measure to do it. And in large measure, when you get to a guy like Ted at Microsoft, he said, what are we good at? What are our core competencies? Let's go back to that. Let's strip away all the garbage and let's jump in and start. And what's from our core competencies, what's the next generation of vision that we can have about our core competencies? That's not what they're doing, it appears, at Apple every day of the week right now.
Right. Well, and to connect it back to Disney, what I admire about it is I'm trying to, for me, imagine the sheer willpower of one human being to come up with this idea of these massive properties and affect it over a very long period of time, seemingly without much variation from the original vision, barring all the natural bullshit that comes up, right?
It's unfathomable, right? I mean,
it blows my mind.
Yeah. And that was with no CGI. That was with, hey, we're gonna put a trap door here, and the people just pop out. They magically, so you don't see Goofy walking around with his head off, walking around the park after he's done his 8 to 5, right?
Right.
And to decide to do that in the middle of the swamp
because it was cheap, man.
Oh, right, but I mean, that's
but you gotta have balls. Yeah.
He did all of that, and you're going, and it's like what? You want to do what in a swamp? And
I'll say this though, I think that the park in Florida was an easier sell to investors because he already had success in California, and the movies, and he had the weekly television show. I don't know if you're old enough to remember that, but he had a Saturday show. He'd get on there. He used to have his dishonorable discharge from the I think it was from the Marines behind him, and it was upside down because they said he'd never be anything because he got a dishonorable discharge from the military. And so every Saturday it was the Walt Disney show. And so he had already had a great measure of success. So again, how do you take people, investors in general, that they have some certain, risk averse, they're not completely risk averse, right? And that's where where it is. I mean, cyber's the big thing right now, right? Dan, I'm sure you deal with this, now that we're making cyber and breaches and everything, we're making it a boardroom problem as much as we are an IT problem. And if you go in and you talk to investors and say, what's your risk tolerance for a breach? They're going to say what? 0.
Yeah.
Right. Well, hold on. You invested in this company. You've got some risk modeling that said we're willing to assume the risk that this isn't a fully functioning company, and you have to understand that cyber breaches are an inevitability, right? What's your risk tolerance? Because if you tell me your risk tolerance, I can tell you how much we're going to have to spend to meet that tolerance, and let that drive the funding discussion for cyber, and not the bottom. Oh, we're here. This is what you've been slotted into. Right?
It's very interesting because they do say low or 0, and I go, well, you understand our revenue is only 250 million. So essentially what you're saying is you want me to spend 400 million in order to give you that,
Yeah.
All right. It's not fathomable. So we really have to break down and you have to get what I've tried to do is get those in the organization to really focus on, well, which systems should have this low risk tolerance,
Right.
and how do we make sure there's proper segmentation in order to do that? Because to protect the 5 systems at a risk tolerance that's low, much simpler. To protect 300 systems,
it's not hard. It's money and manpower, right?
Right. And how much do you want to spend? And once you start putting that dollars, like, oh, well, I think we're willing to accept some risk here. You are.
Well, and to add to that, I also think a critical piece of it, which kind of boggles my mind that it's still discussed in the way it is knowing what your core competencies are. I mean, how can you determine your risk acceptance levels if you don't know what it is that's not necessarily at risk? I think that's a really like 70s, 80s way to look at it. But what do you need to continue, barring some act of God and destruction of the planet, to keep making money?
Yeah.
Right. Well, I don't think that's just a cyber thing. Like in anything, is like, what's my business continuity plan?
Sure. Yeah. Good example.
Right? And that's in part. And now I think in the, as we move deeper into the 21st century, a good part of your business continuity plan is people have to be able to get to you. And it's not keeping the parking lot plowed or anything like it was in the 70s. It's, I've got to keep that pipe open, and people have to have the confidence they have to have the confidence to transact business over the internet. And if you breach that trust, that's when you start to go. I mean, I'll tell you, I went to the Navy Exchange the other day, and they've still got swipe card, and I'm like, and they've got the oldest point of sale machines I've ever seen. All right, because they have a very small population that they cater to, and they're like, they're not going anywhere. Well, guess what? People are starting to go elsewhere. Some of it's a price point thing, but some people just look at it and go, you guys have to do better than this. I mean, Target, for example, was willing to take the hit, and they didn't have a precipitous drop off in their thing because people need what they sell. Right? You need toilet paper. You need all the things that they got. But if it's something where where you can make a choice and it's a boutique item, I'm not coming back.
Well, look at Equifax. What happened to them, right? And this is the overall dilemma. Us as consumers, we know we don't have a choice which credit agency is going to be out there, right? Who does? All the people that lend money. So why didn't they go, wait a minute, we're no longer going to Equifax. Why not stick with TransUnion and Experian? They didn't do that. They didn't stop paying them. So how much do they really care?
Right.
What's the difference in the algorithm that Experian, TransUnion, and Equifax use? Probably very little, which is why my credit score is within a point for the most
part.
Right. So why aren't those that are caring about our security doing something about it? Well, because they don't do enough on their own, so they're not looking to throw rocks when they all live in a glass house.
Right.
Well, their revenue isn't drying up. I mean, that's clear. There's selective societal pressure, and you know what? In a free market, sure, why not? That's what it should be.
Yeah, and except in this case, we as consumers don't have that issue. We don't have a way of voting with our money in this case,
right?
Because unless you're all cash, which very few people can be all cash to go drop down $400,000 or $500,000 on a house, you've got to get a loan, and the bank is going, well, I'm going to go check Equifax. What do you mean? Yeah,
well, and it ain't like, even if you do pay cash, it ain't like you're showing up with a fucking suitcase.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, well, not without getting a visit later by some special agents, let's say.
Yeah. Do you have instruments greater than $10,000? It's not an instrument, but it's a big bag.
Yeah. Yeah. There's this little thing called the Bank Fraud Act or Bank Secrecy Act, which anything that is done, every deposit and payment that's more than $10,000 gets sent off to the Treasury Department.
Right.
Now, I hope I would swear for the love of God, all things holy, I hope that if you do $9,999.99, that the algorithm just doesn't ignore that you're messing with the system.
It doesn't. There's things out there where most of the things take a look at over a period of days,
right.
as it gets, or it takes a look at the origin and the destination. So,
and the frequency of transaction.
Right. So the idea is if you're going to do something, you want to make sure you're below that threshold. That's really the key. Be below, well below. Don't be at like 9,999, and make sure things are, going to Bitcoin.
Well, actually, I tend to say not Bitcoin, but I think there's going to be a digital aspect that's going to have to be made immutable, and blockchain right now is going to do it. And I think what's going to happen is like when you look at like the Westminster Act in the UK and everything, where because people are stashing child porn in public blockchains and everything like that, just the mere fact that it could be there, the banks are like, well, we can't do that. But if you look at, I think long term, you're going to have a federated system of private chains, much in the same way that banks trust other banks today for transactional basis. You're going to do it, but now one bank will have their own private chain, another bank will have their private chain, and then they'll have a third chain, or there'll be an industry agreed upon chain to transact business across. One of the things that I look at is one of some of what we're doing with the companies I'm with now, is that we can make the transaction instantaneous, right? Whereas before you've had, the settlement has been up to 72 hours. Well, the joke always has been the bank's like 72 hours because who has the asset can trade on the overnights on the value of the asset, and who has the cash can trade on the overnights on the value of the cash. But that leaves money in limbo. So what I just heard from Dan is, even if we make it instantaneous, we still don't help mitigate fraud. We make the transactional velocity such that the parties involved in the transaction can be satisfied. But how do we mitigate fraud other than the information that goes into that chain is by consensus or stake deemed to be immutable?
Right. I would agree with that.
And the instantaneous is getting there now with the apps or the things called with Zelle. Zelle makes things instantaneous. And it transfers the risk back to the banks instead of the Federal Reserve, right? In terms of putting it on the rails. Zelle is a direct debit transaction, and it's instantaneous, unlike Venmo. Venmo, you have a Venmo account, it gets held there for a period of time, and then you have to download it. Right. Zelle direct to your bank. And to me is very dangerous from that perspective, because it's gone. It's like when you hit that ACH transaction, you're not getting it back.
No,
Zelle, you better be sure you sent it to the right person, because you're not getting it back.
No, and I think it's a good distinction too. Like when I was designing and implementing secure transaction systems, I much preferred working with debit than credit because of the batching problem. Credit, by law, debit had to be instantaneous from the swipe or transaction to the account, right? Whereas credit, I mean, sometimes that shit would sit for 21 days, man, on a POS that got broken and didn't have network connectivity anymore. And then you'd have to try to figure out how to batch settle it, and was the risk worth it with errors and the charges and all that jazz. Of course, the problem is because it's instantaneous with debit, let's say, if it is fraudulent, it's instantaneously fraudulent. So you don't have that standoff distance based on time. But that's why I think the underlying transactional philosophy of blockchain is similar enough that it could replace, let's say, batch processing. It's just that it has potentially the added measures that don't open it up to fraud. If, like TK was saying, that there's some not necessarily third party, but federated, agreed upon schedule of this is how this is going to function.
Right. And I mean, do you think that like JPMC and some of these other big banks are getting in and, they have the blockchain team? What they have is a couple of guys that nosh about blockchain because nobody's really gotten serious about it at the banking level. But I think internally, I think even if you take a tool like Splunk, for example, just say here's something that everybody can understand, and you go out and you put an agent on every endpoint, and those things are basically dumping their logs back to a central repository. Well, if we say that there's a hole in Splunk, right? If we just, that's our premise today, is that Splunk's not secure, and I can go in and I can mess with the policy management. So even if I get into your system, I can then go in and change the policy management so everything appears to be correct. How do we change that? Well, dump those logs onto a blockchain, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, and I think everybody focuses on the financial aspect of it as opposed to, hey, this is a general tool right now for immutability, and let's figure out how we're going to do that. I mean, some of it is a big math problem for, because when you do it like a work-based chain, that the amount of data that is, what do I have to warehouse, that becomes an issue. And so then you start saying, okay, I'm going to use a Merkle tree, I'm going to attach the Patricia tree to it, and then we're going to try to take that from, let's say, 500 gigs to 80 gigs, right, in any given thing. And so you start trying to do that. But overall, I think we're probably going to end up being more stake-based than work-based, because you're going to have to. And I think when you start saying, guy loses $130 million in Bitcoin because he can't remember the password, or he dies and his wife knows the money's out there, but she's screwed. I think some of the work guys like Cooper and some of these other guys have been doing is, hey, we'll shard those passwords, we get them out there, we get enough consensus or enough stakeholders, then we can say, okay, that person can have their password reset.
Yeah, right. Well, it also, it's an interesting thought, man, because it has a lot of overlap with some of the holes. Well, actually, let me back up. If we can agree that at the core competency of whatever your business vertical is, it really is just data.
Yep.
And you're instantiating data into a financial object or a cyber object or different things. But at the heart of it, in the 21st century where we're headed, as far as I can tell, it's just data. And how you deal with data is pretty consistent across platforms. And I think that's where the secret sauce needs to be then. Is in how do you take that data of whatever it is, agree on what that is, and then instantiate it up into its higher abstracted objects, whether it's a financial instrument or whatever.
And limit manipulation.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
I mean, if an organization just did one thing, in this case, or technically two, you label all data as either externally visible or internal only. And everything was classified to that. So that way, anything that said internal only, you couldn't access it. And that was outside of the organization.
Yeah.
But almost every organization I have ever gone into, I have never seen proper data classification. Not even close.
Well, and I think this is where blockchain is an interesting example. Like where I've been thinking about it recently is in the popular media, some of these things are construed as machine learning learns to be racist and shit like that, right? No, dude. It's not the algorithm, because the algorithm's in memory and runtime. You can't actually attack that outside of an exploit in injecting memory or something like that, right? The problem is the data, and this is why I was making a big point about data. And so we know that there's a variety of ways in which you can poison data. So when you're training the model through the algorithm is really a middleware at that point, that you can influence outcomes in the outputted model based on the training. And so how do you protect against shit like that? And that's what, it's math involved because it's statistics and abstractions. But really, it's a good example of what a blockchain could do, right? If you could take data, instantiate it into a chain, and train the machine learning on that, then as long as you have that consensus from a schedule, you have a good idea.
Well, Dan, I mean, I've talked about this for years, and one of the biggest things in the federal government right now, I think the biggest problem with security of data and where people walk off with data and sell it and do all these other things is the graduated levels of security, right? You got unclass, NIPRNet, CIPRNet, top secret, TS, high side. You get 5 networks built every time you got to stand up a new building because you got different people with security clearances in there. Well, in the 90s, I get that. Right? I totally get that. But in the year 2019, let's make an agreement that, like Dan said, you either don't mind if your adversaries or the world sees your data, or you do. And if you do, encrypt the data, put a tag on it in the form of a cert that not only says, here's what classification it is, but here's more importantly, here's what level of need to know it is. Right? Because when the Walker case in the 80s, that was the big thing. The guy had the Mac Daddy clearance and had access to every bit of data that the government could have, but he didn't have the need to know. And so instead of building 5 pipes, you build one big honking bandwidth pipe, you stuff all that in there. And another way that, these guys have been allowed to walk off with data is we don't build a model of what they're doing leading up to it. Whether it's a website or whatever, everybody clicks on the wrong thing every now and again, right? And the joke is, oh, you accidentally ended up at that porn site 43 times in the last week and a half, right? Whereas if you go to whitehouse.gov, it takes you to the White House. If you go to whitehouse.com, it takes you to an adult website where all the girls are dressed up in red, white, and blue, right? And so
I would know.
What's that? Yeah,
I would not know.
Yeah, it's an age-old example there.
Well, I just don't know I don't know what they have on that site. So
but the point being is, now if I can be stateful in who's done what to the document, I can then start to build a case of who we can trust and who we can't trust. Because if I accidentally click on a document and it won't let me open it, because even if I've got a top secret clearance, I don't have the need to know. Well, now if I repetitively am just randomly clicking, and every time you click on a document, whether you open it, change it, do whatever, that action gets logged to the blockchain. Now you can interrogate that data from the blockchain and go, okay, this guy's a recidivist, going after data that is not necessarily within his purview. And now you can cut down on people doing nefarious things. But that's one of those things where people like their million networks and all those things like that. And I also think, as a taxpayer, to implement something in that, as simplified as that sounds, is implementing something in that genre allows you to cut the cost by 4 or 5x.
Well, and I think it actually gives you a richer data,
right,
to be honest with you. I mean, I have a friend, and he and I have been working for a better part of a year now on at least the theoretical mechanisms by which you would have, let me think how to say this, the mechanisms by which you construct consciousness in a machine, okay? And as far as we're able to reason, you have to disambiguate between consciousness and what we call self-consciousness. So this is the difference between running into a wall and knowing that you ran into the wall, and then running into the wall, knowing that you ran into the wall, and be able to think about what it is to run into a wall, right? It's a higher order abstraction.
Right.
And so what you're really talking about is this scientific fiction, which I believe in, vision of like an information sphere or a noosphere, where the data itself is, for lack of a better term, aware, and it's able to communicate certain aspects to those interacting with it or engaging it. And I think that takes away this need for this monolithic architecture to control data classification labels, which rely on humans and all that stuff that we know inevitably fails. And more to the point, it's just not representative, in my thinking, of where the world is headed. Clearly, the world is headed towards an amorphous cloud of just information that's accessible based on certain engagement criteria. Well, what I hear you saying, which I agree with, is where do you put that? You can't put it with the humans anymore because you're back to where you came from. If you put it in or on the data, or as part of this noosphere and it's fabric, it's what we call a substrate, then it's there, it's consistent. As long as we all agree from the beginning, this is what consistency looks like.
Right. Well, I think what you're talking about is, like in humans, when you talk about performance, you talk about the 4 levels of consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
I'm unconsciously incompetent. I'm consciously incompetent. I'm consciously competent, and then I'm unconsciously competent as the highest form of that. And how do we then say, how does data take that state? Like, if you're going to say we can really start to, I think everybody now, when they say AI, they really mean machine learning. Yeah. And eventually we're going to have true AI, right? And when we do, it's going to have to be consciously competent, or we're screwed. Right. As a nation, as a society, we're screwed in that aspect.
I agree, man. Well stated. And so even if the best we ever get, this is what I would stipulate, even if the best we ever get is some more mature machine learning, and that's the best we ever get, it's entirely data driven. That is machine learning. The algorithms are almost trivial compared to, I think, the societal value in the data that are the input and the output.
Well, I think right now, when people want to talk about machine learning and AI and stuff like that, there's a lot of companies out there that are doing some really good stuff. And what they're saying is, hey, we install this box, endpoint protection, for example, we install this box, and as the data rides through there, we're going to start to train this box to look at your specific data set, right? Because your data set's probably not going to, morph over that. And I think the easiest analogy to that is you and I could walk into the Apple store today and each buy an iPhone. When they're in the box, we have an identical device and we can swap them. The minute we open them up and type in our username and password or Apple ID, they now become user specific only to us, and they're not interchangeable, right? Because how many phone numbers do you actually know now? None, because there's an infinite possibility to store it on that device, as opposed when it was a first generation flip phone, and you could put 99 contacts on there because that's all the JVM on the SIM card allowed for, or 30 messages, right? Those kind of things. And so my phone learns. Yeah, right? My phone learns. Yours, you guys use Androids, and those phones learn. They know what's important to you because they want to, in the design is to give you a better user experience tomorrow than you had yesterday. Why? So you, like, when the Samsung 11 comes out, you go buy that, or whatever it is you're using.
Right.
It's very true. It's very true.
And in the box, the algorithms are the same, right? Yeah. It's when the data is injected into it or onto it, however you want to look at it, they become customized, let's say, personal augmentation devices.
Right. I mean, and literally, if you walk around, it's an extension of people's arms now.
It is, man. It is.
And you can see genuine panic in people when they're like, oh my God, where's my phone?
As they should. It's got their entire life on it.
Right.
Well, to the point where similar to the phenomenon of having an amputation and then having the perception of a phantom limb.
Yep.
I get it constantly. Phantom vibrations from when the ringer's on vibrate.
Yeah.
And psychologically, it's a very similar phenomenon as I understand it. There's tons of research into that. Shit's fascinating.
Well, I mean, because you're not. This is no longer a tool for information as much as it, especially with social media, it becomes a tool for affirmation. And that, I think, is the, what had happened? I've got to be up on my likes and like that. And, there's the two things we call them, FOMO and JOMO, right? I suffer from JOMO. I have the joy of missing out. I don't need to go to the thing or do whatever. But there's people like, oh my goodness, what happened? I didn't see that. I mean, totally. I have Facebook on one device. And it's one that I don't do very much else on, and I don't take it with me when I'm on the road and things like that, right? Because I just don't care enough. And guess what? If I'm gone for 3 weeks, when I come back, I look through that list, and short of somebody having a baby or somebody dying, I don't think I ever missed anything.
Right.
Because it's usually rantings of people that want attention.
The little baby birds. Me.
Exactly.
I would say you probably didn't, if someone had a baby or died and it was that important, you would have probably gotten a text.
Correct. Yeah. But I'm saying it's like, it's just, it's memes. It's stupid memes from my friends and, all the idiots I've grown up with and everything, and all the inappropriate behavior that you can stuff into the internet.
And I don't even need Facebook for that, because you just send them to me over.
Exactly. Yeah.
So perfect.
Yeah. But I mean, you look now, I mean, it's this, like Twitter some days gets to the point where I can't. I want to shut it off and just segregate about 5 people that I want to keep up with, and but you get trapped into this thing where people have to be extreme one direction or the other, and social media is the worst form of that because people can hide behind it. There's an anonymity, and they can be tough guys or girls with that.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's why an important part of this future noosphere, information collective, whatever you want to call it, is how we actually curate all this stuff,
right?
As a society, but also certainly as individuals. I mean, that's one thing my phone hasn't figured out how to do very well yet, because it's not designed to do that.
Well, we were, before we got on, we were saying yesterday that we were going to talk about performance and and all those things. Well, think about how many people now have an app that tracks what they do when they're out running, swimming, jumping, whatever their physical activity is. And immediately at the end of the workout, what is one of those buttons? Send it to Facebook.
Yep.
Send it to Instagram, right? Are you sending it there because it needs to be there? Are you sending it there because you want to tell people you're working out? Right. And it's the old thing, like if you're going to go volunteer your time somewhere and give to charity, if you have to put it up on Instagram, you're not doing it for the people you intend to help.
Right.
Right.
Well, I was going to say real quick, and I think one of the things where people completely misunderstand machine learning specifically in the social media platforms is the algorithm can't tell the difference based on intention. So like when I put my runs up there, I'm doing it to keep myself accountable for a goal I have, right? But to the algorithm, that is the exact same thing that a Kardashian is doing when they want their little me fix, right? Their dopamine drop. And fair play to them. I'm not shitting on them because they do it. It's just there's different motivations and intentions, and the algorithm is completely agnostic. It doesn't give a shit. It's just going to take what's popular and feed it to the biggest population of people they can.
My now it drives people crazy when I talk about it, but I love the one thing I love about Facebook is I love seeing people that are they are Zen masters at the art of the humble brag. Right. And it's usually about their kids and sports. Right.
Yeah.
And things like that. And it's like, oh, you know, it was terrible today, but while we were on our 10-mile run at sub 7-minute pace, it started to rain. Right. It's like,
right.
Yeah. It's an SAT question. Like, what's the subject here?
Yeah.
Right. It's not a thing. Right. But, and I don't know, like, and just from experientially, I have no quantifiable data. It's moms, right? It's not stay-at-home moms. It's not things. It's the moms, and they're just. And there's a few of them, and I'm friends with their husbands for the most part, which is why I follow them because their husbands either aren't on that often or whatever. And it is like, well played. That was a Zen-like experience that you just created for your 12-year-old.
Yeah. Right. Oh man, that's awesome. But at least for me, and this is why I said I wanted to talk about this because I wanted your guys' feedback on this. I track an enormous amount of data, especially with cycling, because the devices are much more advanced for that and they're easier to use for me. But man, I don't really share any of that. Right. I'll share the analysis of it like in a graph. You know what I mean? But I don't push that to a cloud, which I use Garmin products for the most part. They have their own cloud product called Connect.
Yep.
I don't put anything in there because I don't need that. I actually get off on putting it in a spreadsheet and running all the analyses myself, which is the fun part of the hobby for me.
Right. I'll tell you, you look at, the 35 years, 33, 35 years now since I went through SEAL training. And, then it was like, as long as you could take a good old country butt whipping every day of the week, you were on the team. Right. And now they're professional athletes. Right. And, even now, like in my 50s, I want to find out what's going on. You go get an advanced hormone panel, right? Mm-hmm. They draw blood, they figure it out. And it's the quickest way. And then they say, well, you're low on this, you're low on that. And I think what we're doing now, especially when it comes to human performance, is it started with like the polar heart rate monitors in the early 90s and people finally going, okay, I'm not going to get faster by running faster. I'm going to get faster and have more endurance by running a certain part of my VO2 max and everything out, and starting to understand that, right? And so you're now getting better athletes, and the SEAL community has spent millions of dollars to do this, and they're getting top rate professional athletes, and it's garbage in, garbage out. Like you're not feeding them like when they're out in the field and stuff. You're like, people are taking a more closely held look at what you eat and everything like that. But when you start to get older, hey, how do I keep that professional athlete in the sport for as long as humanly possible? Right. Well, hormone replacement therapy is the number one way to do it. I'm not talking about, turning guys into the Incredible Hulk, but if you look at testosterone in the adult male body, for example, there's a range. Let's say the range is from like 9 to 90. It's not that, but let's just, there's a very wide variance of what can be considered normal. When you're an 18-year-old, 19-year-old, it's 90. Right? When you're 55, 14 is considered to be normal. Well, now the new thought is, hey, let's get that new normal at 55. Let's make it like it was when he was 35. Right? And when the guys are 35, let's make it like it was when they were 25, 27, because it's not just about endurance, it's about overall health. Right. And why are you more susceptible to injury when you're 45 as opposed to you're 25? Well, some of it is some of the body's protective measures of testosterone generation, which help with muscle mass and everything else, start to decrease. You can't recover as quickly. You're trying to push yourself to do the same thing. Next thing you know, you're on the sidelines, grabbing your knee or your foot.
Right. Well, and I think one of the beautiful things too with a lot of the science that's being applied to these situations, like take testosterone. You hit 38 to 42 and there's a sharp decline in testosterone production. Sharp decline. This is why we get this effect of middle age and hair graying and muscle mass decretion, so forth and so on. And so this range of testosterone is based off a statistical average of males in this demographic of based on really age, right? That's one thing. And you can say, okay, that's a broad range and you fall within this. The beauty of the technology and the accessibility of these tests, in my experience, particularly if you're in the Kaiser Permanente system, because man, they were glorious to work with when I lived in California. I would go get every 6 months. And so now it's not just me in this total male human population of 38 to 42. It's me over every 6 months over years. So I get a much more tailored average to what my production is like.
No, I totally agree with that. And I think, as we start talking about wellness, as making wellness an offensive thing, not a defensive thing, which traditionally you don't feel well, you go to the doctors, right? And the money, the savings is in wellness, not defensive medicine, right? And you start, whether it's with DNA testing and everything and be predictive. I mean, I'm adopted. So it's one of the only reasons I did DNA testing was because when people say, hey, do you have a history of this in your family or that in your family? My answer is always, I don't know. All right. Because I don't. And 35, 40 years ago, you couldn't do that. Now, and the amazing thing is, and I did 23andMe. And the amazing thing is that they constantly retest your DNA when they come up with new techniques and new things to find. And it's amazing even in the last year and a half or so that I've had it, how much fidelity has increased in the data. All right. And that's the amazing thing to me. You apply that with going to get your blood work regularly and like that. And my personal opinion is you want to know whether you're healthy or not, go get blood work. Yeah. Because that's the only way. And even like down here, I go on my app and it's every time I go, it then does it. And I can go back and compare it against a previous testing and you can start to see a pattern.
Yeah. Well, and so I'll talk about something that's similar that I love to do is I weigh myself every day. Same time, roughly speaking, every morning.
So do I. Yeah, so do I.
And I have a smart scale and it pushes it into an app I have. And I do that not only to hold myself accountable because I'm trying to do certain things and hit certain goals, but the big thing is I can tell based on how long I've been doing this, coupled with other things that I record, what like I'm going to go ride my bike today as long as it doesn't rain when we're done. And I already know based on how much I weigh, what I ate yesterday and the days before, so forth and so on, how hydrated I am, how carb rich I am, so I can go hard. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so I can understand where I am as a human, how I can perform in this training ride that I want to do. And then I can tailor that ride to that.
Nice.
But I think that's all stuff that 25, 30 years ago, I had a buddy of mine he's really into this now as some guy in his mid 50s. And he's like, TK, if we had known, he's another retired frogman. And he's like, we had known in 90, 92, 95, what we know today, it's a completely different outcome. And I'm like, yeah, that's why now, like when I was a young frogman, there was all the old Vietnam guys were getting ready to retire. These guys were 45, they've been in the Navy, 30 years. So they were 40, 48, 49 years old. And they looked like they were 100 years old. Yeah. Right? Because it was just an abusive lifestyle to be a frogman, right? You just kicked yourself in the junk every day for 30 years. Now these guys are retiring at 30 years. And, we're all older, but we don't look like we're ready to keel over somebody's grandpa.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And that's the change. Right. And I think those things athletically, and I think in like when you look at Olympic sports, we went for a time where you could see stupid gains, but then you could see like the East German female swimmers, right? They all look like Ralph, right? The protruding brow, they shaved more than Dan did, but now it's less perceptible, and you're not chemically enhancing yourself. I mean, like cycling is a good example with EPO and all the other things that you've done over the years, right? And like in most tests, like you're not like, even for drug tests, like with cocaine, you don't test for cocaine, you test for the processing chemicals because they stay in your body a lot longer. Well, now you can, the delta of what we know about the human body and how we can just manipulate it with food, water, proper diet, sleep, and all the other things. But you're right. What it does require is you to be diligent about monitoring that. And I think it's made easier now because we got an app for that.
Yep. Exactly. Well, and the other thing I was going to connect this to kind of wrap this up is the benefit I get out of it, apart from the physical benefit, is that I can tailor my cognitive workload throughout the day to this underlying data set. It's data again, right?
Right.
So, you know, if I'm a little heavier, I'm probably retaining water, and I probably shouldn't work out as hard, or maybe harder, depending on which way I am in the scale, the graph, I should say. But I know, because I like to get up really early and do a lot of high cognitive load work, that's going to have a taxing effect throughout the day, depending on how my body feels.
Right. I think it's just, I do a lot of yoga now just because I've arthritis and everything else. And it's just, and once I got off the physical piece of the yoga and stopped fighting it and got into the breathing piece of it and said, I'm not going to pay attention to what we're doing. I'm going to pay attention to my breath, and everything else flows from that. It became a tremendous advantage to me. It clears my head. It does everything like that. And, you know, they have the 6 o'clock classes in the morning and things like that. And as you get up and you do that, now you're coming in. And I tend to apply that across a broader portion of my life. Is, you know, when even like you're working on a computer and you're like doing something, you can feel yourself like, okay, I'm here. Is, hey, slow down for a second, breathe, open that back up again. And now get yourself in a position to where you're not cranking it up. And especially if you're on a deadline and things like that, it's like, okay, I've got to do this. And how do we crank this out? Right.
Yeah. Well, it's trying to remain in that unconscious competence.
Right.
Yeah.
I'll tell you a funny story. So most of the classes you take with hot yoga, you'll hold each pose for 3 or 4 breaths. Right. And so you get used to that. And there's a class that I like to go to that's normally the classes are an hour. This class is an hour and a half. And it's called Dharma Vinyasa, which is a flow by this yogi Dharma. Well, how you get good at breathing is to not hold those poses for 4 breaths, hold them for 12 to 15 breaths, because now if your breathing's off a little bit, you're going to torture yourself. Right. Well, I'm not smart, so it took me a good month before I was like, you know, maybe if I'm breathing and not, maybe if I'm more concerned about my breathing, and it completely changed the way that I think about it. That, and the other thing I think is great for folks, especially cognitively, is spend some time on your head. Mm-hmm. Handstands or headstands, right? Or even in that precursor to headstand where you can crank your body, your feet might be touching, but you're getting that blood flow in that thing. And I think those things are all hugely important, not only to be cognitive throughout the day, but I also think it makes you a more rational human being.
Yeah.
Because you're not fighting, in my mind, you know, in my experience, I'm not fighting myself.
Exactly.
But, you know, you're exercising your demons, whatever people want to call it, but you're not fighting yourself on a daily basis.
Well, I think it keeps you connected to what it is to be human.
Yeah. Yeah, no doubt. Dan's going to do handstands in his office now.
I already do.
With no pants.
He does.
He already does. That's all.
I mean, we did work together. It was not like the first time you walked in. I mean,
what you doing?
There's a reason why I had the corner office with all the windows.
Exactly. Yeah.
Oh, Jesus.
The funny thing I think about when I think about your office was that we had to cover up a hole in the wall with your doctoral degree.
Yeah.
It says it all, right?
Yeah.
I'm like, there's a hole right here. Well, I'll just put my
perfect place for your degree. It was hard though. It was hard though because you're in a strange occurrence of I can't explain why the doctoral degrees from Capital were no bigger than a Post-it note. So we had to.
I'll never forget this, man. I was the first graduate of the program, and they happened to be giving an honorary doctorate to it was the lieutenant governor of Maryland. I don't remember now, man.
I think so.
Yeah. And man, I was all stoked and excited, and they put me up on stage instead of in the crowd. And I'm looking at the table, and I see this giant, like ornately framed, really nice doctorate degree, and I'm like, "Fuck yeah, man!" Like the last few years really were worth it. They gave it to him, dude. I got like a little postcard. I'm like, what the fuck is this? I was bent, dude.
Oh no, yeah. I mean, like you said, how many years of your life did you spend achieving that goal?
I did it in a little over 2.
But and then you got to go your graduate degree, then your undergrad, and in
all of it. Yeah.
The life commitment that
30
you're
years.
gonna
30
you're
years.
gonna do that. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's no small achievement. And it's why so few people get doctorates.
Man, I was bent. I'm still bent about it. Shit.
I can tell. You got like breathe in through your nose, out through your mouth.
TK, all you got to do now is tell them that you've got a product. It's a cybersecurity product that works like the human immune system.
Fuck you. You want to build one? I'll come do it for you.
There you go.
We'll do it right.
All you got to do.
Get three marketing guys, and it's off to the races.
Yep. Jason's head will start spinning. Oh God! All right, friends, it's been fun.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah,
let's do this more often, TK, if you're available.
I will. Yeah, just hit me up, and usually Sunday mornings are pretty easy for me. So yeah, whenever you guys want me to come on, let me know.
Sweet. Maybe Dan will get back to having like a schedule and shit.
Yeah, cool. No, it's awesome, man. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, our pleasure, man. Always a pleasure to talk to you.
Yeah. Next time we'll come up with something off the wall to talk about.
That's usually how it goes, man. Often Dan and I will talk about, hey, what do you want to talk about? This, and then we never ever talk about it.
It's all good.
That's all right. Cheers, everybody. Have a good weekend.
Right, you as well.
Peace.
Bye.